Women are so predictable, he laughed, right as the jazz band behind us launched into some soulless rendition of Jingle Bell Rock. The words hit harder than the stale champagne they'd been passing around in plastic flutes. I was standing under a damn disco ball shaped like a snowflake when HR handed me the envelope, red, festive, and disgusting. Inside, a strategic lateral move effective January 1. Translation: demotion with sprinkles. I called it a restructuring. I called it a middle finger dressed in corporate glitter. The COO, Brent, a man whose favorite adjective for himself was disruptive, actually winked at me like he'd done me a favor. Big picture stuff, Betty, he said, like my career was a whiteboard and he'd just erased half my timeline. HR stood there like mannequins fresh out of a Macy's window, smiling like I should hug them for the privilege. Then the VP of Ops, Greg, leaned in with that lopsided frat boy grin of his and added the cherry. Women are so predictable. You'll be running HR by next Christmas. Laughter erupted. The kind of laughter that smells like Axe body spray and divorce papers. So I did the most predictable thing I could. I smiled. I signed. I clinked my glass against Brent's and said, "To new beginnings," but the glass didn't quite shatter the way I wanted it to. Shame. By the way, before I go on, quick thing. If you're listening to this and you're enjoying it even half as much as I enjoyed watching Brent choke on legalese later, hit that subscribe button and maybe drop a like. It helps us keep the stories coming. And honestly, it's cheaper than therapy. Anyway, back to the party. I walked through that ballroom like I was floating above it. Velvet dresses, bad punch, half-baked shrimp skewers. My colleagues, these so-called strategists, had no idea I'd been planning this moment for weeks. I knew the restructuring was coming. I'd heard Brent and the CFO whispering about cleaning house before Q1 bonuses like they were planning a damn bake sale. They thought I was too old, too rigid, too female to keep up with their little plans. So I played along. I updated files, smiled through meetings, took notes, polished presentations for execs who couldn't spell fiduciary if you spotted them the first 8 letters, all while preparing my own gift for the party. The small black box was wrapped in matte paper with a silver bow. It looked like a jewelry box, something sentimental. I handed it to David, the firm's external legal counsel, right before I left. "You'll want to read what's inside," I said, like I was giving him a Sudoku puzzle and not the start of a legal migraine. He smiled, confused but polite, and I exited before he could open it. Inside that box was a copy of the Centurion MSA, the master service agreement that Brent had bulldozed through 6 weeks earlier. It was our golden goose contract, our Hail Mary to hit the Q4 revenue bump. Except Brent hadn't read it. I mean, really read it, because if he had, he might have noticed that Clause 14b had changed. Slightly, strategically, legally. I didn't forge anything. That would have been criminal. No, I'd simply revised, amended, ensured the final copy sent to Centurion had a small adjustment, one that shifted liability for misrepresentation directly onto the person who signed it. And guess who insisted on being the one to sign? That's right, Mr. Big Picture Stuff. The clause was airtight. Legal reviewed it in the standard version weeks earlier, but the one that got sent to Centurion, the one I uploaded, was special and filed under my compliance credentials, of course. I even had the digital timestamp. Clean, silent, surgical. I didn't need to scream in the ballroom. I didn't need to cry or cause a scene. They were already dancing on a minefield. I just made sure they were wearing tap shoes. And as for David, well, poor guy. He opened that box about 50 minutes after I left the party. Unwrapped it like a secret admirer had finally come forward. I bet his face changed right around page 7. That's where I'd tied the ribbon. Right at clause 14b. I imagine he turned pale. I imagine he looked up across the room at Brent and mouthed the words, "What did you sign?" But I wouldn't know. I was already in my car, Mariah Carey screaming through the speakers, a candy cane in my mouth and the heater blasting like hell had frozen over. I'd done it. I'd just gift-wrapped a legal noose. And all they'd given me was a reorg letter printed on recycled paper. Let the hangover begin. I didn't look back when I handed David the box. Just pressed it into his hand like it was a parting favor from the world's most polite executioner. "Just a little token," I said. "Holiday spirit and all that." He smiled, a little confused, a little charmed, probably wondering if it was one of those homemade fudge tins HR kept pushing on everyone like diabetes in a box. I didn't give him time to ask questions. I just turned on my heel and strolled out of the ballroom, heels echoing on the fake marble like war drums in a Macy's cologne aisle. The cold air outside slapped me like a baptism. Felt cleaner than that whole building ever had. I walked straight past the smokers, interns sneaking shots from plastic flasks, the junior analysts making out under the emergency exit sign like the future was still full of promise. My badge was already deactivated. I'd turned it in before dessert. That's how done I was. They thought I'd be flustered, humiliated, maybe cry in the bathroom like the marketing girl who got laid off mid-secret Santa. But I'd scheduled my Uber before they even brought out the shrimp cocktail. I knew what was coming. The box was just dessert. Back inside, I imagined David unwrapped it slowly. He's a thorough man, always the type to read gift tags twice. Probably thought I'd left him some god-awful candle. Instead, nestled in that black velvet lining was the Centurion MSA, printed bound, real as his panic attack. Page 7, Clause 14b was marked with a thin red ribbon. You don't forget a ribbon like that. Blood red, precision tied. Dare in textile form. He flipped to the page, read the clause, and his whole posture shifted like someone had cut a wire in his spine. I didn't see it, but I know the moment hit, because my phone buzzed just as I reached the curb. One message from David. Please tell me this isn't the final executed copy. I didn't reply. A second buzz. Betty, is this Brent's signature? I slid the phone into my coat pocket like it was trash. That was the last time I let any of them call me Betty. Inside, chaos was just beginning to crack the surface. David must have made a beeline to Brent, who, if I had to guess, was halfway through his fourth scotch and a speech about synergy in vertical solutions. David would have held the contract like it was radioactive, because it was. Clause 14b was the kind of thing that makes lawyers throw up in briefcases. I bet he cornered Brent near the dessert table, voice low and lethal. Tell me this isn't your signature, not a request, not a question, a plea for time machine. But Brent? Brent's the type to double down, probably snorted and said, looks like it. The man once approved a vendor based solely on a pitch deck with Comic Sans. He signed that MSA like it was a napkin agreement at a golf course. Never even noticed the clause. Never thought I'd do anything but roll over and bake cookies like a good little compliance lady. He didn't know I'd already cleared my desk 2 days ago. That my backups were stored, encrypted, timestamped in triplicate. That Centurion had received this version, the Betty version, and had confirmed receipt. He didn't know I'd personally ensured the clause's legality with just enough plausible deniability to make me a ghost in the aftermath. By the time I got home, the lawyer had left me 2 more messages. The COO none, he probably hadn't processed it yet. But David's gut had already started folding in on itself. I poured myself a whiskey. The good kind, not the Costco bottle Brent kept in his filing cabinet. Sat on my couch, still in heels, coat draped over the armrest like I hadn't just dropped a tactical nuke in peacetime. The emails started rolling in before midnight. First a read receipt on the Centurion doc. Then a forwarded thread titled, Urgent Centurion Timeline Concerns. Then one from IT asking if I'd disabled internal access to the compliance archive. No, I hadn't. That access expired the moment they slid that restructure letter across the tinsel-covered table. I just made sure there was nothing left worth finding. The thing about a quiet exit? It echoes louder than a tantrum, especially when the paperwork you leave behind is smarter than the men who tried to bury you. Let the red ribbon choke them. I was already writing my next contract, with people who actually read the fine print. 3 weeks before the party, I was walking past the executive lounge. Yes, that little bourbon and budget clubhouse they think only they know how to use, when I heard them. Brent, the COO, and Eric, the CFO, laughing like Wall Street frat boys who just discovered ChatGPT. I paused outside the frosted glass, mostly because I heard my own name in that familiar tone, the one men use when they're not afraid of consequences. Just get through Q4, sideline Betty in January, Brent said. She'll fold. Women like her always fold when you dangle titles. Eric chuckled, low and conspiratorial. She'll cry, maybe threaten to walk, but where's she gonna go? Compliance grandmas don't get bonuses. They get shuffled. They laughed, actually laughed. 2 6-figure dipshits playing corporate chess with broken pawns. What they didn't know, I wasn't a pawn, I was the damn rulebook. The door creaked open and I kept walking, heels clicking like a metronome, calm as a Buddhist hitman. Didn't look in, didn't flinch. But in that moment, I stopped being the cleaner. I stopped being the fixer who quietly swept up after their idiotic decisions. I became something else entirely, a slow-burn fuse. Now, to be fair, I'd already flagged the Centurion contract twice, once in a Slack thread nobody read, and once in a compliance memo that HR conveniently misplaced. The deal smelled like panic. Centurion was a big client with big dollars and bigger demands. Brent wanted the logo. Eric wanted the bump on the quarterly report. I wanted them to read the damn fine print. They didn't. The contract they jammed through was like handing a loaded gun to a toddler and praying for a Nobel Peace Prize. Deliverables we couldn't meet. Penalty clauses that would choke us in litigation. IP exposure so wide, it made our patents look like napkin doodles. But they were desperate. Brent strutted into every meeting like he'd just invented mergers. Told the board it was locked in, told the staff it was transformational, told me to chill out, that I was over-engineering things again, that I was too cautious. His favorite insult, you're not a visionary, Betty, you're a mechanic. Fine, call me a mechanic. Because that night, after everyone left, I stayed behind. Fired up the company VPN, brewed a cup of bitter-ass breakroom coffee, and opened the Centurion MSA again. Page by page, clause by clause, and there it was, blinking like a beacon in a fog of corporate BS. The loophole, Clause 14b. Misrepresentation Clause. In its original form, it was vague, covered the company's liability if we failed to deliver due to intentional deception. But that was too soft. Too shared, so I rewrote it. Not illegally, just precisely. The updated version shifted the burden of misrepresentation not to the company but to the individual signer. It stated that if the signatory had knowledge of false deliverables and signed anyway, they alone would carry financial liability, personal liability. Indemnified from the company, tied to assets, crystal clear. Then I drafted the metadata trail, the digital revision log, the upload chain, every breadcrumb necessary for a lawyer to trace the document's version history back to Brent's eager little pen stroke. Did I whistleblow? No. Did I warn Centurion? Not in words. I just made sure the version they received was the correct one. And by correct, I mean devastating. You see, it wasn't revenge. Not yet. Revenge is personal. This was professional hygiene, a necessary purging of idiocy. I wasn't angry, I was focused. I was a surgeon mid-operation and Brent was the tumor. People think betrayal happens in shouting matches and smashed phones, but sometimes it happens in silence under fluorescent lights with a lukewarm coffee and a contract nobody bothered to read. I didn't tell anyone. Not legal. Not HR. Not even my assistant, who was too busy making PowerPoints for meetings she wasn't allowed to speak in. Instead, I smiled through every all-hands update, took notes at Brent's vision meetings, nodded when Eric explained the Q1 comp structure. I even brought cookies one morning, peppermint, the kind Brent liked. I played my role, the predictable woman, the reliable Betty, and when the time came, I would walk out without a word, leaving behind a clause so sharp it could gut a CFO from 3 boardrooms away. They wanted to sideline me before bonuses? Fine. I just made sure the fallout cost them more than a holiday party. Clause 14b didn't scream, it whispered. That was the beauty of it. You had to be looking for it, really looking. Buried under performance metrics, arbitration zones, indemnification clauses, and jurisdictional fluff, there it was. 38 words. Cool. Clean. Precise. A little legal scalpel that turned Brent's signature into a personal financial noose. I worded it carefully. The undersigned, in full acknowledgement of representations made herein, assumes individual liability in the event of material misrepresentation of deliverable feasibility, as determined by third-party audit. Simple, airtight. It didn't point a finger, it just made sure when the roof caved in. It landed square on the moron who kicked out the support beams. The old version blamed the company. The new version, it pointed directly to whoever signed the damn thing. And Brent, bless his entitled little heart, insisted on being the one to sign. This is legacy stuff, he said, grinning across the conference table like a child with his first crayon drawing. Put my name on it. I remember the legal intern, Jack, I think his name was, asking if I should review the final version one last time. Brent waved him off with a Betty's got it covered. He didn't even look at me. Just signed with a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost more than his attention span. He had no idea what he'd just done. And why would he? He thought compliance was an afterthought, a formality. The corporate equivalent of buckling your seatbelt after you've already hit the deer. Brent lived in a world of LinkedIn buzzwords and expense account sushi. He didn't read clauses. He read headlines. And if it wasn't in bold with bullet points, it didn't exist. So when I uploaded the final Centurion contract into the client portal, I made sure it was the version. The correct version. Not the last one legal approved. Not the one the CFO thought we were sending. No, this one was mine. It had Brent's signature floating like a death warrant on page 7. Centurion acknowledged receipt that same day. Automated response. Timestamped. Immutable. Then I saved a backup, not on the company drive, not in the cloud where Brent's goons might sniff around if things went sideways. No, I archived it on a separate encrypted USB, air-gapped, labeled template SOWQ for Final Draft DV6B. Nothing screams ignore me like the word draft and a fake version number. I slid it into a manila folder between a half-finished onboarding flowchart and a fake HR training summary. Let them dig for that if they ever tried to clean house again. You'd think I felt nervous after that. That maybe I stared at the ceiling at night, wondering if I'd gone too far. But no, what I felt was focus. Surgical clarity. Like I was finally doing the job I'd been pretending to do for a decade, protecting the company not from outsiders, but from the dumb bastards inside it. It's funny. In all the PowerPoint decks Brent made me revise, in every bloated vision statement I ghostwrote, the word accountability showed up like clockwork. He loved that word. Used it in emails like seasoning. We must hold ourselves accountable. Accountability is key. Let's empower each other through accountability. So I gave it to him. He wanted legacy. He just signed his name to a clause that made him a legend, in the kind of footnote lawyers used to scare MBA students. And all of it, legal, clean, executed without a single red flag, because I didn't fight them in the boardroom. I didn't confront them, I didn't yell. I just slid one needle through the vein of their arrogance and let the ink do its work. I kept showing up, kept nodding in meetings, polished the Centurion slide deck for the investor call, helped HR draft the restructuring notices, mine included. All the while the contract sat there, glowing like uranium in a banker's basement. It was only a matter of time. Clause 14b didn't need to be shouted, it just needed to be opened. And when it was, when David peeled back the ribbon and read that line, that's when the real damage began, because the trap wasn't in the paper, It was in the pride. The moment Brent decided he was too important to double-check anything I touched, he made his choice. And I made sure it stuck. The morning after the party, the office smelled like peppermint vodka, stale coffee, and corporate denial. Half the staff were WFH but really still in bed nursing headaches, and the other half looked like they were experiencing a shared spiritual crisis. The only one fully awake was David, the legal counsel, sitting in his office with bloodshot eyes and a red ribbon lying limp on his desk like it had personally betrayed him. He didn't sleep. I know that because I received a read receipt from my exit email at 3:47 a.m., followed by 2 silent calls and a third that lasted exactly 9 seconds. Long enough to hit voicemail, short enough to mean he'd realized I wasn't answering. By 8 a.m., David was on the phone with Centurion. He didn't ask questions, not at first. Just confirmed that the contract on their end matched the copy I left him. It did, of course it did. They'd received it on November 28th. Their procurement director had signed off, uploaded it to their compliance portal, and already marked the first milestone as in progress. That's when David's voice changed, lowers in tone. That tightening rasp attorneys get when they're walking a tightrope over a pit of liability, because he knew. The Centurion MSA wasn't just real. It was active, live, operational, and the deliverables? Let's just say Brent had promised them a Formula One car, and all we had was a rusty tricycle missing a wheel and a maintenance team that thought zip ties were best practice. 3 major features were already weeks behind dev's schedule. The integration window Centurion expected in January. Our engineers didn't even have access credentials for the staging environment. Brent had assured the client all systems were ready for deployment. In writing. And that's where Clause 14b stopped being theoretical, because that clause didn't care if Brent had a headache. It didn't care if he was taking a long weekend or if the dev team was doing their best. It only cared about 2 things, false representation and the signature at the bottom. And Brent's name was there in thick. Eager ink. David sat back, rubbed his temples, and began dialing. First call, Brent, went straight to voicemail. Second call, Eric, the CFO, Eric Ever the Rat, answered on the first ring. Swore up and down that the Centurion deal was airtight. Overpromised? Nah, just optimistic framing. His words, not mine. David cut him off. Have you actually read Clause 14b? Eric paused. Which one's that, exactly? David hung up. Next, he called engineering. Asked about milestone progress. Got silence. Then panic. Then one brave junior dev admitted they hadn't even started the API handoff. At 10:13 a.m., David sent an email to the executive team. Subject line, Centurion MSA urgent review of Clause 14b. Attached the signed version. CC'd Brent, Eric, CTO, head of legal, board liaison, external counsel. No one replied for 17 minutes. Then Brent responded with, "What's the issue? Pretty standard clause, right?" David's answer was only 4 words. Read it again, carefully. Meanwhile, the office began to realize something was missing. Not someone, something. Questions started pinging around Slack like popcorn in a microwave. Where's the final compliance checklist? Anyone got Betty's Q4 risk notes? Who has access to the vendor audit schedule? Crickets. My entire internal documentation library had been archived. Not deleted, just exported and removed from public view. I'd set the access expiry to 12:01 a.m. the night of the holiday party. The second that champagne flute hit my lips, my legacy systems went dark. No one had access, not even IT, and worse, no one knew where I'd stored the backups, because the truth was I hadn't. They weren't staying with that company, they were with me now. And Centurion, they'd already expressed interest in a consultant with special insight into the MSA structure. Betty was gone, but her shadow, that was just starting to stretch. Legal didn't know how I got Clause 14b through. The board didn't understand how it wasn't caught. And Brent? Brent was still smirking, probably thinking he could talk his way out of it. After all, he always had. Except this time, there was no talking. There was only the paper. And that paper didn't care about Brent's charm or his track record or the fact that his golf buddy's son worked at Centurion. It only cared about performance, truth, deliverables, and failure. By noon, David scheduled an emergency meeting. Half the executives were traveling. Brent was unreachable. But Eric was sweating bullets, because what started as a hangover was quickly becoming something else. Legal exposure. And the one person who could explain the trap, could possibly neutralize the bomb, had left with a glass of champagne and a smile. Let them scramble. The paper trail was already on fire. They called the emergency board meeting under the guise of a Q1 readiness alignment, which is corporate code for someone screwed the pooch and legal is out for blood. I wasn't there, of course. I didn't need to be. My name never came up on the invite list again. But I had sources, people who still had a soul buried somewhere beneath the Salesforce dashboards and Synergy spreadsheets. One of them, bless her, sent me a screenshot of the whiteboard after the first hour. It said, Clause 14, be right arrow Brent, with a damn question mark. They were still trying to figure out how it happened, how the golden boy COO with the private school jawline and the $2,000 loafers had walked them straight into a liability minefield. The meeting started late because Brent was missing. Not physically, he was there, in his usual seat with the back half reclined like he thought he was on a Delta One flight. But mentally, absent, staring at the printed MSA in front of him like it was a Sudoku puzzle written in ancient Aramaic. David opened the meeting flatly, no throat clearing, no small talk. Just Clause 14, B transfers liability to the individual signer in the event of deliverable misrepresentation. The room went dead quiet. A couple board members flipped their copies of the MSA like they were hoping the clause had moved since the last time they looked. It hadn't. One finally asked who signed this. Brent coughed and said, I did, but that's standard, right? David didn't even blink, not in this version. Someone else asked the real question, who revised it? That's when Brent's ears went pink. He shuffled his papers, stammered, it must have been look, Betty handled the drafts. I didn't write it. She must have changed the document without approval, snapped the general counsel. Brent looked like a raccoon caught in the glow of a Tesla dashboard. She was compliance, that's what she did, she handled language. Eric, the CFO, suddenly found religion, sat up straighter, pulled his chair an inch away from Brent like liability was contagious. I don't recall reviewing that clause, Eric said, slowly, like he just remembered his own neck was on the chopping block. I assumed legal had final eyes. David turned to him. Legal never received this version, more silence. One board member, a graybeard ex-litigator who normally said nothing but approved everything, leaned forward. Let me get this straight. She altered the clause. Sent this version to the client. Brent signed it. Legal never caught it. Compliance resigned. And now what were exposed? David nodded. If Centurion triggers the penalty clauses and cites non-performance, Brent personally is on the hook. And by extension, so are we if this results in litigation. Brent barked a laugh. You can't seriously be suggesting what tricked me? David didn't move. I'm saying she outmaneuvered you. There's a difference. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in that boardroom. Someone knocked over a coffee cup. No one picked it up. Brent turned to Eric, looking for a lifeline. You knew we were behind on deliverables. You said the Q1 patch would. I said we might be behind. Eric cut in. I never said to lie about capabilities. David raised an eyebrow. Did you know the API was still non-functional when we signed the agreement? Eric looked at his hands. I don't recall. Was unraveling, thread by thread. The more they dug, the more it became obvious Betty hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't overreached. She'd built the trap and left them the instructions, and they still walked right into it. The CTO tried to ask a question about rollback provisions and was met with a wall of silence. The head of HR looked like she was trying to mentally update her resume. The board chair finally leaned back and said, we need a damage report. Today. David closed his folder with that same dead calm. I suggest you also start preparing a contingency plan, because Centurion is within their rights to invoke escalation. And right now, the only person who can explain this clause is no longer employed here. And that was the turning point. Not the clause, not the liability, but the dawning realization that this wasn't an accident. This was a message. Betty didn't burn down the building. She just took the fire codes with her and watched the smoke rise. The first call came in on a Monday morning, 8:03 a.m., time-stamped and recorded like all good disasters are. Centurion's contract liaison wasn't even trying to hide the irritation in his voice. We've reviewed the milestone schedule. 3 of the 5 deliverables are delayed. The integration environment hasn't been provisioned. The user testing cohort is empty. Brent tried to spin it. We're optimizing the rollout to ensure long-term scalability. There was a pause. Then the liaison replied, is that why the project dashboard hasn't been updated since December 4th? Brent muttered something about holidays and bandwidth. The call ended 7 minutes later with a formal notice of penalty clause activation. $185,000 due by end of week, with additional fees pending. And that was just the beginning. By noon, 2 more Centurion reps called, legal and procurement this time. The tone wasn't angry anymore. It was cold, surgical, like they'd realized they weren't talking to adults. They invoked Clause 8C of the delivery terms, cited breach, and asked for written confirmation of next steps by close of business. That same afternoon, Centurion's internal counsel looped in external litigation prep. That's when Brent cracked. He went to David's office like a kid who broke the TV and hoped Dad wouldn't notice. Said they needed a win. Said they should offer Centurion a revised SLA. Maybe throw in a free license extension. David didn't even look up. They don't want a freebie, he said, scrolling through an email on his screen. They want Betty. Brent blinked. What? David turned the monitor toward him. There it was. Subject, request for personnel clarification from VP. Strategic Operations Centurion, 2. Executive team company name, redacted given the escalating delivery concerns and lack of consistent communication. We would prefer to negotiate directly with Betty R. Last name, who was our primary point of contact during initial drafting. Her precision and clarity were instrumental. We would consider project continuation contingent on her direct involvement moving forward as interim project lead. Please advise on her availability. There was a long pause. Then Brent said she's no longer with the company. David just raised an eyebrow. You might want to fix that. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking tea and listening to Miles Davis when my phone buzzed. It was a Gmail notification, personal account. Subject line, a quick conversation from someone named Evan Ritter. I didn't recognize the name until I opened the message. Hi, Betty. My name is Evan Ritter, VP of Strategic Ops at Centurion. I hope this message finds you well. We've been reviewing the current rollout, and frankly, we've run into some turbulence. Your name keeps coming up in glowing terms. I know you're no longer with company name, but I wanted to reach out directly. Would you be open to a brief call this week? We'd like to explore bringing you on in a consulting capacity, ideally to steer the ship back on course. Your version of the contract was remarkably clear. We trust you. Let me know what works. Warm regards, Evan. I smiled, not gloating, just full. They finally read the fine print, not just the contract, me. The moment shifted, the energy, the air in the room. Suddenly I wasn't the ghost haunting their incompetence. I was the answer to the fire alarm they pulled without a hose in sight. For months I'd been the woman they nodded past in meetings, whose notes got ignored, whose flagged risks were a little too conservative. Now I was the one person they needed to not go nuclear. I drafted a polite response. Told Evan I'd be happy to hop on a call. No rush, I was currently reviewing other opportunities, but I'd make time by Thursday. Just to keep them leaning forward. Brent called me that night, twice. I didn't answer. The next morning, I received an email from the company's CEO. First direct message I'd gotten from him since last year's happy workiversary. Auto notification. Betty, if you're open to discussing a short-term return, I believe we could work something out. You've always been an asset. Please let me know. I didn't respond right away. I forwarded the message to my attorney and added one line. Tell them I don't do short-term. I do control. Centurion wanted results, not theater. They weren't interested in Brent's TED talk vocabulary or Eric's spreadsheet excuses. They wanted precision. Stability, they wanted me. And the best part? Now I got to set the terms. By Friday morning, it wasn't just internal. The first article dropped at 9:17 a.m. on a mid-tier tech site known for soft embargo leaks and juicy postmortems. Headline: Centurion contract sparks legal drama at company name redacted. Deliverables in doubt. The piece was surgical. Quotes from unnamed sources. Phrases like systemic compliance failures, questionable executive oversight, and the big one, contractual liability may extend to individual signatories. That line hit like a crowbar to the investor Slack channels. By 10 o'clock a.m., the CEO was in damage control mode, spinning vague updates and typing like his fingers were trying to outrun the truth. He released a statement blaming seasonal bandwidth constraints and transitioning leadership. Translation: we're flailing but too proud to admit we're drowning. Meanwhile, Brent finally understood the thing he'd signed wasn't just a document, it was a loaded weapon. And Clause 14b? That was the bullet with his initials carved in. His name was now attached to every legal inquiry, every breach review, every conference call with stone-faced men in corporate litigation offices who charged by the minute and smiled never. When Centurion's procurement department formally triggered the penalty clause, Brent's world shrank to a single horrifying line of legalese: personal indemnification as fallback guarantor. He called me. 6 times. I watched the screen light up, the contact photo still that smug little LinkedIn headshot he made me crop last spring. Decline. Smail, then another call, decline again. On the 7th attempt he got something, not me but the truth. Out of office reply: hi there, thanks for reaching out. I'm currently unavailable for direct correspondence. For all contract-related matters or legal inquiries, please contact Centurion's legal department at legal@centurionglobal.com. Best regards, BR. That's when the real panic began. Because that wasn't just silence, that was a door closing. It wasn't personal anymore. I was a legal firewall now. And Brent? Brent was on the wrong side of it with a gallon of gasoline and a smoldering match. By noon, investor reps were flooding the CFO's inbox with phrases like material exposure, lack of governance, and fiduciary risk. Someone on the board leaked an internal audit report draft, which cited departures from standard compliance procedures going back 8 months. Translation: we ignored Betty until it got expensive. I heard they pulled an all-hands meeting that afternoon. Brent didn't show. Eric pretended to be on a call. HR issued a Slack message reminding everyone to practice kindness and resilience. By Saturday, the Centurion deal was being openly mocked on LinkedIn by industry peers. One VC even posted a meme: empty chair with the caption, when your compliance officer resigns and takes your company's dignity with her. It got over 8,000 likes. Internally, they scrambled to assign blame, but the audit trail was immaculate. The metadata didn't lie. Every document version, every approval stamp, every digital signature, and every arrow pointed to Brent. He'd greenlit the MSA, he'd overpromised the deliverables, he'd ignored my memos, my emails, my warnings, and now his personal assets were on the line. Technically, legally, irrefutably. The irony: I never touched a cent of his salary, never doctored a file, never raised my voice. I didn't need to. I'd built a system that did exactly what it was supposed to. A machine that protected the company from itself. And when they turned on me, the only thing left holding it all together was my silence. They didn't just lose a compliance officer. They lost the person who'd quietly kept the roof from collapsing while they hosted TED talks under it. Now the roof was gone, and I was sipping coffee on my patio, reading the latest article about corporate accountability in the post-compliance era, wearing a robe I didn't buy on clearance for once. No press release, no gloating, just a quiet storm I didn't need to stand in. Let it burn. January 3rd. New office, new badge. New name on the door, Betty R. Compliance Strategy Lead, Centurion Global. The building didn't smell like desperation and cold brew like my old one. It smelled like quiet efficiency, polished concrete floors, matte black elevators, conference rooms named after chess pieces. A place that didn't care about ego, just execution. A polite receptionist walked me to my new corner space, glass walls and all. Inside, a standing desk, 2 monitors already configured to my specs, and this part made me smile, a small welcome card from the procurement team. Handwritten, excited to have you officially on board. I dropped my coat over the back of the chair, rolled up my sleeves, and opened the disaster file. The Centurion rollout was a mess. No sugarcoating it. Milestones half met, data inconsistencies everywhere, back-end integrations still using deprecated endpoints. It was like trying to build a spaceship out of expired IKEA parts and ego. But unlike Brent's crew, I didn't panic. I audited the structure in 4 hours. By lunch, I'd terminated 3 redundant vendors and rerouted development through Centurion's in-house DevSecOps unit. By the end of the day, I'd rebuilt the Phase 1 roadmap. Clean, achievable, real. That's the thing about hiring a woman you once underestimated. We don't show up to impress you. Show up to replace you. Mid-afternoon, while reviewing legacy documentation, I saw it again. Clause 14b, still there, still binding, still elegant in its cruelty. Centurion's general counsel had it framed for me as a welcome gift. It hung behind my desk now, mounted in brushed steel and glass. Not a trophy, a reminder. My weapon was never anger, it was clarity. The email came at 4:38 p.m. from my former CEO. Subject, rebuilding together? Body, Betty, we've been reflecting internally. With all that's transpired, I think it's clear we undervalued your contributions. If you're open to discussing a return in a senior leadership capacity, I'd love to set up a time to talk. Let me know what works. Best, Daniel, I didn't get angry, didn't roll my eyes, just sipped my tea, still hot from the kettle, and typed back one line. Women may be predictable, but I'm not your woman anymore. Sent, then archived. There was no gloating. No need for speeches or vindication posts or LinkedIn essays about empowerment. I'd done the job, I'd burned nothing, and still I had everything. Outside my window, the city moved like it always had, fast, indifferent, pulsing with opportunity. And I sat there in the middle of it all, steady, certain, silent. No parade, no applause, just the quiet hum of competence finally respected. And behind me, framed in gold, Clause 14b, appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.